Deuteronomy chapter 12. Now I'll tell you the laws and teachings that you have to obey as long as you live. Your ancestors worshiped the Lord, and He is giving you this land. But the nations that live there worship other gods. So after you capture the land, you must completely destroy their places of worship, on mountains and hills or in the shade of large trees. Wherever these nations worship their gods, you must tear down their altars, break their sacred stones, burn the sacred poles used in worshiping the goddess Asherah, and smash their idols to pieces. Destroy these places of worship so completely that no one will remember they were ever there. Don't worship your God in the way those nations worship their gods. Soon you will cross the Jordan, and the will help you conquer your enemies and let you live in peace, there in the land He has given you. But after you are settled, life will be different. You must not offer sacrifices just anywhere you want to. Instead, the will choose a place somewhere in Israel where you must go to worship Him. All of your sacrifices and offerings must be taken there, including sacrifices to please Thee and any gift you promise or voluntarily give Him. That's where you must also take 1/10 of your grain, wine, and olive oil, as well as the firstborn of your cattle, sheep, and goats. You and your family and servants will eat your gifts and sacrifices and celebrate there at the place of worship, because your God has made you successful in everything you have done. And since Levites will not have any land of their own, you must ask some of them to come along and celebrate with you. Sometimes you may want to kill an animal for food and not as a sacrifice. If the has blessed you and given you enough cows or sheep or goats, then you can butcher one of them where you live. You can eat it just like the meat from a deer or gazelle that you kill when you go hunting. And even those people who are unclean and unfit for worship can have some of the meat. But you must not eat the blood of any animal, let the blood drain out on the ground. The has promised that later on He will give Israel more land, and some of you may not be able to travel all the way from your homes to the place of worship each time you are hungry for meat. But the will give you cattle, sheep, and goats, and you can butcher any of those animals at home and eat as much as you want. It is the same as eating the meat from a deer or a gazelle that you kill when you go hunting. And in this way, anyone who is unclean and unfit for worship can have some of the meat. But don't eat the blood. It is the life of the animal, so let it drain out on the ground before you eat the meat. Do you want that to make you successful? Do you want your children to be successful even after you are gone? Then do what pleases Thee and don't eat blood. All sacrifices and offerings to Thee must be taken to the place where He chooses to be worshipped. If you offer a sacrifice to please Thee, all of its meat must be burned on the altar. You can eat the meat from certain kinds of sacrifices, but you must always pour out the animal's blood on the altar. If you obey these laws, you will be doing what your God says is right and good. Then He will help you and your descendants be successful. Israel, as you go into the land and attack the nations that are there, they will get rid of them, and you can have their land. But that's when you must be especially careful not to ask, how did those nations worship their gods? Shouldn't we worship Thee in the same way? No, you should not. Thee hates the disgusting way those nations worship their gods, because they even burn their sons and daughters as sacrifices. Obey all the laws and teachings I am giving you. Don't add any, and don't take any away. Deuteronomy chapter 13. Someday a prophet may come along who is able to perform miracles or tell what will happen in the future. Then the prophet may say, let's start worshiping some new gods, some gods that we know nothing about. If the prophet says this, don't listen. The Lord your God will be watching to find out whether or not you love Him with all your heart and soul. You must be completely faithful to Thee. Worship and obey only Thee and do this with fear and trembling, because He rescued you from slavery in Egypt. If a prophet tells you to disobey your God and to stop worshiping Him, then that prophet is evil and must be put to death. Someone else may say to you, let's worship other gods. That person may be your best friend, your brother or sister, your son or daughter, or your own dear wife or husband. But you must not listen to people who say such things. Instead, you must stone them to death. You must be the first to throw the stones, then others from the community will finish the job. Don't show any pity. The gods worshipped by other nations have never done anything for you or your ancestors. People who ask you to worship other gods are trying to get you to stop worshipping the who rescued you from slavery in Egypt. So put to death anyone who asks you to worship another god. And when the rest of Israel hears about it, they will be afraid, and no one else will ever do such an evil thing again. After your God gives you towns to live in, you may hear a rumor about one of the towns. You may hear that some worthless people have talked everyone there into worshipping other gods, even though these gods had never done anything for them. You must carefully find out if the rumor is true. Then if the people of that town have actually done such a disgusting thing in your own country, you must take your swords and kill every one of them, and their livestock too. Gather all the possessions of the people who lived there, and pile them up in the marketplace, without keeping anything for yourself. Set the pile and the whole town on fire, and don't ever rebuild the town. The whole town will be a sacrifice to your God. Then he won't be angry anymore, and he will have mercy on you and make your nation stronger, just as he promised your ancestors. That's why you must do what your God says is right. I am giving you his laws and teachings today, and you must obey them. Deuteronomy chapter 14. People of Israel, you are the Lord's children, so when you mourn for the dead, you must not cut yourselves or shave your forehead. Out of all the nations on this earth, the Lord your God chose you to be his own. You belong to the Lord, so don't behave like those who worship other gods. Don't eat any disgusting animals. You may eat the meat of cattle, sheep, and goats, wild sheep and goats, and gazelles, antelopes, and all kinds of deer. You may eat the meat of cattle, sheep, and goats, wild sheep and goats, and gazelles, antelopes, and all kinds of deer. It is all right to eat meat from any animals that have divided hoofs and also chew the cud. But don't eat camels, rabbits, and rock badgers. These animals chew the cud but do not have divided hoofs. You must treat them as unclean. And don't eat pork, since pigs have divided hoofs, but they do not chew their cud. Don't even touch a dead pig. You can eat any fish that has fins and scales. But there are other creatures that live in the water, and if they do not have fins and scales, you must not eat them. Treat them as unclean. You can eat any clean bird. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. But don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, ospreys, cormorants, storks, herons, and hoopoe. You must not eat bats. Swarming insects are unclean, so don't eat them. However, you are allowed to eat certain kinds of winged insects. You belong to the Lord your God, so if you happen to find a dead animal, don't eat its meat. You may give it to foreigners who live in your town or sell it to foreigners who are visiting your town. Don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk. People of Israel, every year you must set aside 10% of your grain harvest. Also set aside 10% of your wine and olive oil, and the firstborn of every cow, sheep, and goat. Take these to the place where the Lord chooses to be worshipped, and eat them there. This will teach you to always respect the Lord your God. But suppose you can't carry that 10% of your harvest to the place where the Lord chooses to be worshipped. If you live too far away, or if the Lord gives you a big harvest, then sell this part and take the money there instead. When you and your family arrive, spend the money on food for a big celebration. Buy cattle, sheep, goats, wine, beer, and if there are any other kinds of food that you want, buy those too. And since people of the Levi tribe won't own any land for growing crops, remember to ask the Levites to celebrate with you. Every third year, instead of using the 10% of your harvest for a big celebration, bring it into town and put it in a community storehouse. The Levites have no land of their own, so you must give them food from the storehouse. You must also give food to the poor who live in your town, including orphans, widows, and foreigners. If they have enough to eat, then the Lord your God will be pleased and make you successful in everything you do. Deuteronomy chapter 15. Every 7 years you must announce, the Lord says loans do not need to be paid back. Then if you have loaned money to another Israelite, you can no longer ask for payment. This law applies only to loans you have made to other Israelites. Foreigners will still have to pay back what you have loaned them. No one in Israel should ever be poor. Your God is giving you this land, and He has promised to make you very successful, if you obey His laws and teachings that I'm giving you today. You will lend money to many nations, but you won't have to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they won't rule you. After your God gives land to each of you, there may be poor Israelites in the town where you live. If there are, then don't be mean and selfish with your money. Instead, be kind and lend them what they need. Be careful. Don't say to yourself, soon it will be the 7th year, and then I won't be able to get my money back. It would be horrible for you to think that way and to be so selfish that you refuse to help the poor. They are your relatives, and if you don't help them, they may ask that to decide whether you have done wrong. And He will say that you are guilty. You should be happy to give the poor what they need, because then they will make you successful in everything you do. There will always be some Israelites who are poor and needy. That's why I am commanding you to be generous with them. If any of you buy Israelites as slaves, you must set them free after 6 years. And don't just tell them they are free to leave, give them sheep and goats and a good supply of grain and wine. The more the has given you, the more you should give them. I am commanding you to obey thee as a reminder that you were slaves in Egypt before He set you free. But one of your slaves may say, I love you and your family, and I would be better off staying with you, so please don't make me leave. Take the slave to the door of your house and push a sharp metal rod through one earlobe and into the door. Such slaves will belong to you for life, whether they are men or women. Don't complain when you have to set a slave free. After all, you got 6 years of service at half the cost of hiring someone to do the work. If the firstborn animal of a cow or sheep or goat is a male, it must be given to the. Don't put firstborn cattle to work or cut wool from firstborn sheep. Instead, each year you must take the firstborn of these animals to the place where your God chooses to be worshipped. You and your family will sacrifice them to thee and then eat them as part of a sacred meal. But if the animal is lame or blind or has something else wrong with it, you must not sacrifice it to your God. You can butcher it where you live, and eat it just like the meat of a deer or gazelle that you kill while hunting. Even those people who are unclean and unfit for worship can have some. But you must never eat the blood of an animal, let it drain out on the ground.